What a marvel it would be to have a trail that would allow you to walk the entire breadth of the West Coast along the crest of the Sierra Nevada mountains, the Cascade Mountains, up through Oregon and Washington. And when you backpack, you get to go somewhere where it feels like no one has ever been before.
And you don't have to push yourself. It's go at your own pace, enjoy, smell the wildflowers, lay in the grass, and connect.
My name is Nastia Bendebury, and my background is actually in the sciences. And I spent a lot of time working indoors and staring out into the woods, wondering how much time do I have left to actually go out and enjoy the outdoors. And so at some point after I had worked for a long time in sciences, I returned to the very first passion that I had, which was being outside. Since that, in probably like 2018, I've devoted myself to figuring out how to spend as much time as possible in the woods, in nature, because I kind of figured that that's what life is really all about. And guiding in the Pacific Northwest is really incredible because it's probably one of the most welcoming environments in the entire world. Like, it rains a lot, but it's not too hot, it's not too cold, there's lots of water, it's very beautiful, there's a huge shift of seasons, and you kind of get the best of all worlds when you're living and working out here in the woods. And so I've been guiding with Rare Earth Adventures since 2020, done the snowshoes, done the backpacks, done the mountain climbs, and I'm really excited to talk to you about the PCT.
I'm Colt and Peeters. I grew up in Wisconsin, where my family took me out camping almost every weekend throughout the summers. I remember bringing me and my sister out there and just letting us kind of run around as children should. And as I've grown older, something that I tried holding on is to that childlike curiosity. And I think it's so important as I progress through my life is how to keep that with me. And I've discovered that in the outdoors. I moved to Colorado, right in the hearts of Rocky Mountain National Park, and worked at this little hostel lodge that was off the Continental Divide Trail, very similar to the Pacific Coast Trail, just in the center of the States. And there, my heart fell in love with the mountains, the elk, the moose, the bear, the deer, the lakes. And that's when I really started thinking, how can I share these experiences with other people? So I just started building up my repertoire of knowledge, spent every waking moment I could in the backcountry, whether it was backpacking, mountaineering, in the snow, learning how to snowboard at age 20, just marvelous. And what it did for me and my mental health to just that connecting and grounding is something to not be understated. And then I spent some time bumping around, moved back to Wisconsin, and love my family back home, but my heart belongs out west. And I got certified in wilderness medicine, took up a wilderness therapy job out in Central Oregon in Bend, actually, where we worked in the Oshakos. And from there, I've just kind of continued progressing, and I've found myself here at Rare Earth Adventures. And I am coming into just my second season here, and I am more than thrilled to be beginning the summer season pretty shortly here.
The summer season cannot be the summer season without our main adventure, which is the Pacific Crest Trail. So before we get into the details, we figured we'd give you a sense of what exactly to expect. We're going to do an overview of the PCT, because if you're here, you want to know about the trail, you want to know about the history, you want to know the details of what it looks like to actually run it. We're going to give you some details about our routes, which is just telling you the various options that we have for the tours that you can book with us. We're going to talk about backpacking in general. Like, this is a very different approach to being in the woods than car camping or just day hiking, and comes with its own collection of struggles and benefits and marvels and terrors. We're going to talk about the basics of, what to pack once you've committed to the idea that you're going to be backpacking. What do you actually bring with you? What do you leave behind? What are the things that people think that they're going to want on the trail and then very quickly discover that this was a terrible decision about 10 miles in? It's impossible to talk about the PCT without talking about weather, wildfires, and wildlife, because this is a trail that for the last few years, probably since about the 2010s, has been deeply affected by wildfires. And when you're on a hike that's this big, you can't not think about the potential outcomes. Everything from lightning strikes to fast-moving wildfires to bears getting into your food. So we're going to cover all of that. We're also going to cover something that is universal but very rarely talked about, which is how to actually use the bathroom when you're out in the wilderness. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to train, which is all the details that you need to know about actually getting ready to go out on the trail.
The Pacific Crest Trail starts just over the border into Mexico and runs all the way across the border into Canada. It is roughly 2,600 miles in length, as we can see here, and it stretches across the southern Mojave Desert into the Sierra Nevadas, Northern California, then throughout Oregon and Washington, covering a vast and diverse landscape. And as Nastia said, this is, I think, often romanticized, and with all the influencers going on right now, you see a lot of the good, and it is one of the most beautiful trails, but it's not without hardships. When you begin this journey, you have a lot of love and compassion for yourself and willing to push boundaries that you never realized that you could break through, and the sense of accomplishments you gain from 2,600 miles of hiking, and not to mention the connections you meet along the way.
So the trail is this 2,591-mile long trail that stretches from Mexico to Canada. And it was put together actually really earlier than I expected. So it was initially proposed in the 1920s, where there was a group of conservationists, of hikers, of nature lovers that were living out west. And they basically looked around and they realized that there were already 4 trails on the West Coast that stretched across California, Oregon, and Washington. This was the John Muir Trail, the Tahoe Yosemite Trail in California, it was the Skyline Trail in Oregon, and the Cascade Trail in Washington. And I started thinking about what a marvel it would be to have a trail that would allow you to walk the entire breadth of the West Coast along the crest of the Sierra Nevada mountains, the Cascade Mountains, up through Oregon and Washington. Because the first genesis of the trail came in the 1920s, that meant that there was a lot of physical labor available for actually building it. So in the previous photo, there is this road crew of young men that are just pickaxing rocks in order to build the trail. And in this photograph, you have a group of pack horses that are supplying the workers. And so the building of the trail was the product of YMCA groups, of civilian conservation corps groups that were just organized and put to work building this incredible monument to the nature of the West Coast. It's a crazy trail just from the standpoint of length, which there's not that many, nearly 2,600 mile trails in the world, but also the absolute raw endurance that you need to be able to complete it. So over the course of the entire length, you have more than 400,000 feet of elevation gain. A lot of this is in the Sierras, but it's just an astonishing feat of physical exertion to be able to do this kind of thing. And luckily, as you go through the southern portion of it, you get to kind of acclimate and get what's called your trail legs, or you start to get used to the rhythm of hiking these 10, 20, 30-mile days with massive elevation gains. But conditions aren't always good. They're not always what you expect. This photo on the right here is a group crossing Forster Pass, which is the high point of the trail in the 1970s. And so they're at 13,000 feet and they get hit by a snowstorm. And this is just something that you have to be prepared for, you have to be equipped for, which means that you're crossing the mountains, carrying all your snow gear, carrying everything that'll keep you alive when the snow hits. And it's a pretty intense organizational effort to even be able to make it that far.
So for most people, typical length is about 5 to 6 months. And we'll get into it in a little bit more, but you can kind of break it down. Southern California takes you about 1 month to complete. And you kind of have that Sierra Nevada section in Central California that's about another month. Northern California to hit the Southern Oregon border is about another month. So California alone, it just kind of gives you that wide vision scope of how just massive it is and how long. 3 months. That's a baseline. Some people take 3 to 4 months. And then Oregon, Washington, most people will kind of cruise through in a 1 month time. But that's half a year just spending in nature and on the trail and discovering yourself and rediscovering yourself. You can see this picture here. The PCT actually is horse graded as well. And you can see here folks doing some work FKT, you might hear this, stands for the fastest known time. Karel Sabe set the record a handful of years ago. It was around 52 or 53 days, and that record was actually broken just 2 years ago by a man named Timothy Olson, who set it in 48 days. Karel Sabe saw that and went at it again last year, and he reset his record by 5 more days. But 46 days to cruise through 2,600 miles, and I think that number was like 430,000 feet elevation gain, is no small feat. I think there's something to be said when backpacking. I've had my times of, just trying to cruise through the hike and be really fast, and it's incredible, but also it's important to slow down and remember why we're out here. And you don't have to push yourself. It's go at your own pace, enjoy, smell the wildflowers, say hi to the squirrels, lay in the grass, and connect. But 46 days is something to marvel at, no doubt.
Absolutely. And somebody like Karel Sabe, he ran the trail. So he was basically doing 15-mile days of running every single day for 46 days straight. And that's not something that you can do without support. And so as we move into the section of talking about the trail in chunks, where we have, the Southern California, we have Central California, we have the Northern California, the Oregon, and the Washington, it's worth noting that when you look at a map, it seems like a continuous trail. So this first section is 652 miles, and that's not a distance that you can hike without resupply. Like, there's no way that you could carry enough food for 652 miles. And so one of the big things about the PCT is logistics, because you can't just start walking. Like, when they were building the trail, they didn't just start walking. They had their pack horses, they had their teams that brought them the food, they had massive plans. And even though everything has become really developed on the trail and there's lots of guides that are available, there's half-mile maps of the PCT where you can see all of the elevation, all of the stops, all of the campsites, all of the places where you can resupply, you still have a really big challenge of figuring out how exactly you're going to feed yourself, how exactly you're going to be able to walk this entire distance and deal with all of the challenges that entails. One of the biggest challenges in the Southern California section is, although it is astonishingly beautiful and you start out pretty early in the year, it's hot. Like, this is the desert. There's not a lot of water. There is not a lot of shade. And so you're spending the first probably 2 weeks of the trail just crossing super inhospitable landscape where there's nowhere to hide during the day from the beating sun that is on you all of the time. And this is a place where a lot of hikers at the beginning get incredibly disheartened, because you're absolutely fresh from wherever it was that you were living beforehand, and now you're spending day after day in utter desolation. The winds here tends to be really intense as well, and so it's just a real struggle. You get very dirty, you get very sweaty, but because you're hiking through Southern California and you're kind of skirting all of these really urban areas, there's a lot of places to resupply. There's a lot of places where there's something called trail magic, which I don't know if you guys have heard about this before, but because hiking the PCT is such a spiritual experience for people. Anybody who's gone from Mexico to Canada on foot has spent months of their time with their trail bubble. So it's these people that they're constantly hiking with. They're leapfrogging each other. They end up at the same campsites. They end up taking the rest days together. They grow to love the trail in a way that is permanent. Once they're off the trail and no longer hiking it, what they'll do is they'll come back and they will provide for the hikers. They'll set up barbecues and make hamburgers at trail junctions. They will leave water caches in areas like this where maybe it's 30 miles between springs. And so you stumble in and you find that somebody has left 1,000 gallons of water on the shipping pallets in the middle of the desert, so that you're not totally out of luck when you're walking through a really difficult, hot section without any shelter and without any water. Once you're through the desert, you hit Central California. Each section of the trail has its own motivational structures. So the first portion of the trail, Southern California, has a really strong motivational structure because it's brand new, right? You're going through it, you're powering through this new terrain, you're getting used to living on the trail, you're setting up your bubble, you're figuring out what this is going to look like. Canada is unbelievably far away. You're not thinking about that yet. You're just getting used to it. Central California is probably the most beautiful section of the trail because here you go through the Sierras. It's a 505-mile section and passes through some of the most scenic territory in the entire United States. That comes at a cost because you are dealing with massive elevation gain. You're dealing with massive weather. You're living at high elevation. So the entire section of the Central California Trail is above 7,000 feet. Early stages of mountain sickness can appear in people when they're above 6,000 feet for an extended period of time. And some people acclimate, some people don't. And so if you're one of the unlucky ones that is predisposed to suffering at altitude, this section can be incredibly taxing because at 7,000 feet continuously, the air is thin, the terrain is difficult. You have 8 passes on this section that are above 11,000 feet. And so you're going up pretty far up, which means that even when you hit this, say you start at the border in May and you get here in April/early June, we're in the Sierras. And on a heavy snow year, that means that a lot of the trail is hidden under snow. And so instead of walking on the trail, you're hiking across snow. And so in general, this is the most physically taxing and challenging section of the trail. So this is a picture from near Mount Whitney, which is one of the 14,000-foot mountains on the trail. And Forester Pass, which is the pass that passes by Mount Whitney, is actually at 13,000 feet. So it's only really about 1,500 feet below the peak of Mount Whitney. And this is one of those places where people will do side hikes. So the length of the PCT is really a very nebulous number because you're not just hiking on the PCT, right? So a lot of people will get here to Crabtree Meadows and they'll hang around for a day and then they'll climb Whitney, they'll come back down. And so there's a lot of side trips where people are exploring nearby areas, adding to their mileage without making any progress on the PCT itself. And so once you're through Mount Whitney, you also get to go through Yosemite and the Tahoe area. And this is one of the greatest things because as you pass by this area, you're passing through the backcountry where it's really isolated and quiet of an area that is completely overrun with people in the front country. Like, this is one of the best things about backpacking, especially on a long trail like this, is that you don't have to deal with crowds. There's almost never crowds, especially once you start to get into these deep sections of the PCT. You're on your own. It's you with nature. You can hike with people. You can choose not to. And you really, really get to set the tone of the adventure for yourself in a way that very few other outdoor adventures let you. It's a really good idea to try a trail of some kind, of some length, before you get onto the PCT. Through Yosemite, there's a trail called the John Muir Trail, which shares a course with PCT for more than 50 miles. And that's a trail that a lot of people will try out as a dry run. I mean, permits are hard to get. Permits are hard to get for a lot of these. We'll talk about that a little later. But the John Muir Trail is a really good taste of what it's like to backpack in the backcountry at elevation. And a lot of people suggest trying it first in order to get a sense of, do I even like this, before committing to 2,600 miles of adventure. Northern California is where the crisis begins. And that is because it is terribly, terribly boring. That's not really fair to say because, I mean, there's no trail that is completely without its merits. But what happens to people is that you are carried through the first section of the trail in the desert by sheer excitement and novelty. You're carried through the Central California portion of the trail on the back of the most beautiful vistas that you've ever seen. And then when you hit Northern California, you get into the woods and start to lose those incredible vistas. And you've been on the trail for a really long time. At some point here, you hit the halfway point. And so it's just a very, very difficult point in terms of motivation. There's fewer massive destinations. There's fewer killer views. A lot of the times you're deep into wildfire season, and so you're dodging wildfires left and right. You're constantly on the look to make sure that you're not going to get burned out, or you're hiking in heavy smoke conditions. And so this is a place where a lot of people quit on the trail and have the most difficult psychological ones, not necessarily physical ones, because you're through the most difficult physical aspects of it. But we've been hiking for 3 months every single day at this point, and things are starting to get really rough. And though there's a lot of water in the Sierras, you start to get back into this condition where as you pass through Northern California, you start to hit that Southern Oregon biome. And the Southern Oregon biome is a pretty dry, pretty burnt out place, which is why there's so many wildfires. Relatively speaking, it still has mountains, it still has scenery. You pass through Lassen National Park, which has amazing volcanic mountains and terrain. It's one of the only volcanoes to have erupted in the continental United States in written history. The other one is Mount St. Helens. And so you get to see a lot of interesting geology, but a lot of times people are just so wrecked that they're really starting to suffer at this point. You also go through Mountain Marble Wilderness, which is really exceptional. Like, you're down below 7,000 feet, so you're not at high elevation, and there's tons of lakes, there's tons of water, but as you probably know, if there's a lot of water, there's also a lot of mosquitoes. Everything is eternally this balance of the beauty and the suffering as you deal with gear and exhaustion and psychological weight and everything else.
Oregon is a breath of fresh air. It's a new state. It's exciting, and you just hiked the entire state of California. So you are ready to move on to Oregon. In Oregon, you're crossing over 57 mountain passes, you pass 6 volcanoes, and you don't have those extreme elevation changes like you did in the Sierra Nevadas. There is quite a bit of elevation through Oregon, but you manage to stay between 5,000 and 6,000 feet for the most part. But when you're hiking through the Sisters, you get into the Columbian Gorge in the northern part of the trail. There's going to be lots of ups and downs, but not as extreme. And here we have Crater Lake. Crater Lake is a marvel unto itself. One of the most beautiful places you can manage and navigate around. So throughout Oregon, you start to get into more of those vista viewpoints. You get Mount Hood, but there's also Mount Jefferson that towers in the central parts of the state. You cross the Three Sisters, and there you have the Sisters, Jefferson, and Mount Hood as the 3 highest peaks in Oregon, and the PCT runs right through all of them. And here you have Mount Hood again. I feel like often people believe Oregon, especially the west side of the Cascades, to be incredibly wet and always rain, which summer months is not the case for you folks, that are living here. It is sunny almost every single day in the summertime. You'll get some scattered showers, especially in the southern parts of Oregon. You're going through the Umpqua or Willamette National Forest, but you're pretty much running along the Cascade range the entire way. We're kind of starting out on the east side, and we start making our way across the west side as we approach into the Mount Hood Wilderness area. And Mount Hood Wilderness is just marvelous. And this is my home territory, and it's full of waterfalls, wildflowers, the diversity you kind of come across. You just hike through Southern Oregon, which it's more of that dry, arid climate, and then you approach into the lush side of the tropical side of Oregon. Here is where Oregon will end. Cascade Locks, the Bridge of the Gods. You just got done through Mount Hood Wilderness and through the Columbian Gorge, and Oregon was a breeze. Some folks will cruise through Oregon in around 2 weeks, hiking about 31 miles a day. We are itching to get into Washington and hopefully beat some of that early snowfall that might be happening as we approach September and October. And we enter into Washington. We got 515 miles. This part of the trail does not ever really reach over 7,000 feet, but it is one of the most remote sections of the trail. If you're looking to get away from the people, like the Sierra Nevadas, Washington kind of hits that place for you. Where Oregon through the Mountain Hood Wilderness that I was talking about is very accessible for folks in Portland. So you do run into some more crowds out there. As soon as you hit Washington, you get through the Washington side of the gorge, you hit the Indian Heaven Wilderness. It's a subalpine plateau that's been created by this string of monogenetic volcanoes that it kind of sits upon. And monogenetic volcanoes, they erupt once, and then that's it. And so it kind of creates this alpine meadow with wildflowers and hundreds and hundreds of lakes. If you like to jump into alpine lakes, this is kind of the area where you're going to want to be. Good place to relax, reconnect, slow down. We're entering that final stretch. It's a very, very spiritual place, rich in indigenous culture. And as you continue through Washington, you hit the Pasayten Wilderness, which is one of the most rugged parts of Washington. There's over 150 7,500 foot peaks there. over 160 bodies of water. You're constantly on ridge lines, getting these beautiful panoramic viewpoints and just really rugged, remote wilderness. You're just battling through it all. As you continue on, you get the North Cascades, which here we have Glacier Peak. You don't really get any views unless you are deep into the wilderness. And the North Cascades is our home to Mount Baker, El Dorado Peak, Mount Shussakan. And again, you're just battling through to make that last final push into Canada. So essentially, we are able to choose from with our routes is this kind of length of 135 miles of the Pacific Crest Trail. So you can kind of see it starts just about 20 miles south of Mount Hood, right outside the Salmon Huckleberry Wilderness, and it goes right up through the Indian Heaven Wilderness that I was just talking about. We always use a plethora of routes. It's hard to choose always the best route. There's weather conditions. Wildfires will often close areas. For example, in 2019, and a lot of the routes that we are utilizing now for this year you can see just the burn mark and the devastation that these fires have created. We pick and choose about 20 to 30 mile routes that exist somewhere along this trail, and we try to keep them to the PCT as much as possible. There are so many opportunities for what I like to call side quests. Just little outreaches, viewpoints, side mountains to go accomplish and conquer. So here's one route that we will utilize. 30 miles, about 7,500 feet in elevation gain, runs through the Marco Hatfield Wilderness, which is essentially the wilderness that encompasses the Columbian Gorge on the Oregon side, and feeds into the Mount Hood Wilderness. So all our backpacking trips are going to run us 4 days, 3 nights, all very beginner oriented in the sense that we're going to teach, train, educate you on what it means to plan your own backpacking trip. That being said, there is physical expectation that you need to be able to hike certain mileage with a certain amount of weight and be able to go up elevation. And elevation gain is nothing to squawk at. It's very different to hike 30 miles with maybe 500 feet in elevation versus 30 miles with 7,500 feet. It really pushes the boundaries and limits of your mental capacity, and that's where having guides and a group to go with to have that encouragement and that positivity to, yes, you can do it. I don't know how many times I've been on a trip, whether it's the backpacking or Mount St. Helens or you name it, where you're with folks and you can see the doubt creeping in, and we want to help mitigate that as much as possible and say, you can do it, we can do it, and we're in this together. And so throughout these routes, there's multiple camp spots that we choose from. We always have backdrops, and some of the notable attractions you'll find on this is you got Twister Falls there. Punch Bowl Falls is the waterfall that's feeding into that beautiful pool of water. And maybe the most notable attraction that some of you guys have heard of is Tunnel Falls. It's always, especially when you're hiking along the PCT, it's a real treat to see. You got a tunnel that goes behind the waterfalls. You're hot, you're sweaty, the mist is landing on your face and cooling you. The Marco Hatfield Wilderness is home to, I don't know how many waterfalls, but I swear it's every couple miles you look and see, and there's another waterfall. Another route that's kind of side quest that feeds into the Pacific Crest Trail. We're starting over at the Zigzag Trailhead. You start over and you can do this East Zigzag Traverse. So you get this beautiful mountain ridgeline hike that enters into the Ramona Falls. And Ramona Falls it's a waterfall out of a fairy tale. It's, for any of you Lord of the Rings fans out there, the Columbian Gorge is very Rivendell-esque. Lush, green, the wildflowers, ridge lines, towering basalt columns, and then these just epic, majestic waterfalls. For all our backpacking trips, we'll do a debriefing at our gear bank, which is located in Troutdale. You have an idea of the route you're doing, but you can start chatting with the folks a little bit more and see what people are up for. And this is my favorite route, by no means an easy one. As you can see there's 9,000 feet of elevation gain. But essentially with this, you get to start your hike in the beautiful, majestic Columbian Gorge, and you hike all the way to the base of the Mount Hood, ending at Timberline Lodge. So here you got some river crossings. There's Sandy Creek there, Lost Creek, and in that bottom right photo, you have Zigzag Overlook, which is just this kind of panoramic view. Mount Hood's in the background. You look out into the coastline, only 2 hours away, but you kind of start seeing those coastal mountains existing in that horizon line. And then the last route is my favorite, but unfortunately with this route, it's pretty much only, well, it doesn't become accessible until about mid-June because of the amount of bodies of water that exist there. Some people like to nickname this area the Mosquito Heaven Wilderness. And bugs are something that you have to deal with. Part of planning your backpacking adventures is knowing when and what time to go. So if you come to Indian Heaven end of August and our September backpacking trips, this is when we're going to be utilizing this trip. It's a lot more relaxed, a lot more chill. If you're looking for more of that spiritual experience, this is the area to reground yourself and root yourself in kind of nature and just spend time with folks, building those relationships, dipping in alpine lakes and smelling those wildflowers. And there you got, Blue Lake, Mount Adams was in the distance. It's set right in the heart between Mount Adams on the east, Helen's on the west. To your north, you have Mount Rainier, and then Mount Hood is to your south. So it's just this really unique gem of a spot that not many people really know about. So you don't get those crowds that you might get on the northern Oregon side.
Yeah. Well, when you hit Washington, you hit an area that is so much less traffic. Like when you go out to Helen's and you go out to Adams, you really are struck by, there's no cities. There's no people. Population density is, I don't know, maybe like 10 people every square mile, if that, maybe even less. Why backpack? Why not just drive up to some trailhead and camp right next to the car? And obviously the answer is different for everybody. And for some people, the answer will be, there is no way that I want to subsist off of backpacking meals of cold rehydrated noodles and whatever else people do on the PCT. Because like on our trips, we bring stoves and we cook hot meals. But for somebody who's through hiking, if they sit around and they're like, it's an extra half pound of weight to carry the stove, and then I have to worry about fuel. A lot of people don't bring stoves, and so they're just eating cold food for months on the trail, which really contributes to the psychological burden of it, because you're stuck just chewing on Cliff Bars or cold ramen, which is a grim set of events. But you can also backpack in a way that's really beautiful and really vibrant and balance the load between taking absolutely everything that you have ever wanted with you in the woods and taking nothing at all. And so we live in a world where we have a lot of stuff all the time, constantly available to us. You can set the air conditioner, you can set the heater, you can drive everywhere, you can kind of live in this climate-controlled bubble your entire life. And when people go camping, they often will bring all of the creature comforts of home with them, because why not? Like, you have your car right there, like you can bring everything. And so backpacking is an opportunity to really reassess your relationship to nature. Humans have lived in the context of nature for tens of thousands of years, right? Like the human species is like 300,000 years old. And even as recently as the 1920s, when people went out into the woods, it was not a process of bringing everything except for the kitchen sink. And so backpacking is an opportunity to really get into the rhythms of nature and start to think about your relationship to the woods, to the land, to your own history, to the future of the planet. And so as you're hiking, you spend a lot of time surrounded by nature that is isolated in a way that you can't get if you're just driving to a car campsite, because car trailheads are always crowded. There's always lots of people. One of the things that's really incredible is that there's this moment of reintegration where you get to choose something that has faded into the background otherwise. And so it's a really, really powerful way of taking a step back, reevaluating the things that you care about, and choosing something different, maybe. Along the way, we practice a lot of the basic skills that you need for the wilderness. And so this is Colt here. This is an Indian Heaven. When you're sitting above the trail and you have a good viewpoint, it's a great opportunity to practice route finding, to practice orienteering. And so everybody carries a map and a compass, and you start to learn how to be able to look at a topographic map and compare it against what you actually see so that in case you ever are in the woods and your cell phone falls in a river or it breaks or the battery runs out, you're not completely out of luck. Like, you have some way back. You can figure out where exactly you are. You can figure out how to chart a course. Along the way, you deal with a lot of things. So we talked a little bit about camp cooking. We've talked a little bit about, just getting comfortable being in the woods. You learn how to set up tents. You learn how to also protect yourself against bears. We don't see a ton of bears. Like, bears are there. You see their poops. We've never, ever had a bear get involved with one of our tours. I don't think anybody's even seen a bear, but because you're in this backcountry territory, you do have to be thinking about keeping your food safe from bears. This is something that you need whenever you are hiking through the backcountry. So from the southern Sierras, so when you hit the Central California territory and all the way up through Oregon and Washington, you have to be careful about bears. And so we do bear hangs, which is the process. It's actually one of my favorite things to do, but also one of the most agonizing things to do. When you're traveling by yourself, you have a pretty light kit of food, right? You have a couple of freeze-dried meals. You might have some apples. I really don't like rehydrated food. And so when I hike, I'll usually bring salami and cheese and hard-boiled eggs, which means that I'm carrying a ton more weight because it's not dehydrated, but I eat a lot better in the trail. But when you take a group of, let's say, 10 people's food and you have to hang it, that is an agonizing process, because what you're doing is you're taking a carabiner and you're launching it onto a tree branch and you're bringing it down to the ground, and then you are just hitching it hand over hand to get it up onto the branch. And so this is usually done at the very end of the day. Everybody's really tired because we guide in this area a lot. I think that a lot of times branches break. And so as you go through the season, you progressively start to lose potential bear hang branches. And so it's really fun on one hand because it ties in a skill that's really good to practice, which is throwing things and aiming and being able to hit a goal. It's kind of like woods basketball, but it's also agonizing because you're tired, it's dark, and you can't find a branch. We do a lot of backcountry cooking, and so this depends on how involved we want to be on a certain tour. Some groups prefer to eat just rehydrated meals. Some groups prefer to get more involved and figure out, how do we start with raw ingredients and actually make something that isn't just, something to fill us up, but is actually something that's really tasty in the backcountry. And so we have these Whisper Light stoves, which is a fuel canister that you carry with you. You pressurize it, and you have actually a really solid flame. If you've got some lightweight pots and pans, you can make a really, really, really tasty dinner. Along the way, this is one of my favorite pictures. You get really dirty. There's a couple different things that you can do to mitigate that. A lot of times people will wear gaiters, which are these little cloths that fit over the laces on your shoes that prevent dirt and dust from getting in. But the reality of the situation is that you're going to be sweating, it's going to be dusty, you're going to get muddy, and that's a huge part of the pleasure of the trail. It's just kind of accepting that, you know what, we'll get clean later. We'll wash in a stream, we'll wash in a lake, and that'll be enough. When you're backpacking, a lot of the times you get to have these campsites that feel magical. Because if you've done any amount of car camping, you kind of know the drill. You show up to a place, you have a little spot, you're surrounded by neighbors on all sides. You can cross your fingers and hope that your neighbors are decent and that they won't be too loud. And it usually works out. Sometimes it doesn't. But it's group campsites tend to be chaotic and well-trodden. And when you backpack, you get to go somewhere where it feels like no one has ever been before. I think that that's something that we fundamentally all search for. I have this feeling that that's why people want to hike the PCT in general. It's this feeling of getting out beyond the limits of what is normal for us. And so when you hike all day and you get to this incredible meadow, you're on the side of an alpine lake, the sun is out, the grass is soft, there's the smell of wildflowers and the trees are waving in the wind. It feels like you're in a magical place, and you cannot get it with just regular camping or glamping. And so I think that backpacking is really the way to learn a new way of relating to the world, because it really forces you to reevaluate your priorities of what do I want, what I really care about, how do I want to spend my time when my cell phone isn't pinging and the TV is not playing and there's nothing to distract me. Who am I when I am by myself? One of the ways in which this happens is a super valuable shared ethos in the guiding community called Leave No Trace.
Leave No Trace is a marvelous nonprofit organization where they're focused on educating individuals who want to go out in the backcountry on how to minimize the impact that they leave. So they kind of have these simple 7 rules that you want to follow. All our guides, if they are not for this season, are going to be Leave No Trace certified, which you can go through these trainings to better educate people who surround you. But essentially at the root, it's just how do we minimize the impact and how do we keep these beautiful natural places around for future generations to use. And I'll quickly go over like the quick 7. You want to plan ahead, prepare. You want to travel and camp on durable surfaces. You want to dispose of your waste properly, leave what you find, minimize campfire impacts, respect wildlife, and you want to be considerate of others on the trail. So essentially through these 7 core principles, it's going to really set up this foundational piece to, 1, harbor this closer knit relationship with the earth. And I think it's really important when we recreate in the outdoors that you take the accountability within yourself to be a steward of the land. You know, the earth provides for us and we want to provide back to the earth. We want to take care of our homeland. Gear and food. Yes, this can be a daunting task. Yeah, especially if you've never backpacked before. It's like, where do I begin? Backpack, food, rain jacket, headlamp, navigation, and you want to start simple. And here you can kind of see this is essentially on this table a pretty good baseline of everything that you're going to have. So you can see your sleeping setup, tent, sleeping pad, stoveware, first aid, bear spray, navigation, toiletry products. And I think the best way to kind of begin to start looking at what you need when you go out in the backcountry is the 10 essentials. Honestly, on a day trip even, but it gives you a baseline foundation of, okay, sleeping system, great, that's important, of course. Water, yeah, we need water. It's important to stay hydrated. And we need water to cook as well, oftentimes. Food, light source, navigation, first aid, sun protection, insulated layers, how to dispose of your waste, which we're going to talk about in a moment here. And then, yeah, layers. You can see in this backpack, essentially 50 to 60 liter pack is going to get you right where you want to be. You want it nice and compact, balanced bag. You know, when I started, was that person that needed to bring everything and anything that I might potentially want. I'm going to be out there for 2 days or 3 days starting off. It was like, okay, I'm bringing 2 pairs of clothes. I'm bringing sandals and shoes. I'm bringing my journal. I'm bringing 2 different books that I wanted to start reading. I'm going to bring whatever it was. And I find that all of a sudden I'm like, man, I'm carrying like 50 pounds of weight and it might be for 2 days. And over time, I've discovered simple is good. And the less you bring, the more enjoyable time you're going to have experiencing your trip. Because we're talking about hiking anywhere from 10 to 20 miles a day, which, you know, sometimes for me, I look, 10 miles, huge day, but sometimes not so bad. But you throw on 30 to 40 pounds of weight, which that will be pretty typical for your backpack to weigh on a 4-day trip or even just hiking the whole Pacific Crest Trail. Right around 30 pounds is pretty lightweight. So 30 to 40 pounds is that sweet spot. But once you put that weight on, it's a whole nother ball game. I mean, you want to find a really padded waist strap so it takes all that weight off. I rock 1 pair of pants and might bring 1 pair of shorts, and you have your rain jacket, an insulating layer, and maybe some base layers. And I don't know how many times before I led a backpacking trip, you know, I always make folks clear out their bags, and I see the younger version, the beginner version of myself when I started getting into backpacking. And they have a different pair of pants for every single day and different t-shirts. And I always provide the feedback, hey, I love that you're set up, but when you start getting into it, you want to be comfortable. Being comfortable is one of the most important things to ensure that you have an enjoyable time. So you're going to be warm and you're going to be dry, warm and dry. What's going to make that happen? A puffy jacket and a rain jacket, and maybe bring that extra pair of pants. But really, you don't need changes of clothes in the backcountry. We're coming back to our roots of touching base with the wild animal child version of yourself. Food, you want to bring stuff you enjoy. bring variety, make it easy, keep it simple, find lightweight versions, because food adds up very fast. But I can't emphasize enough, bring what you enjoy and like.
And consider also, a lot of people try to hike keto as opposed to hiking just eating sugar snacks all the time. And if you do decide to do something like that, make sure that you're well adapted before you actually hit the trail. Don't start anything new or stop doing something when you get on the trail. Make sure you're not making massive changes.
Just wanted to touch base. Safety is paramount in the backcountry, and kind of overarching, all our guides have wilderness first responder of some sort. Wildfires very much do exist. We're aware of them, always checking the radar, and we will not travel in areas that are near wildfires, because also air quality and smoke is a hazard. Essentially, they exist and we're aware of them, and you should be aware of them, and there's resources to make yourself aware of what areas to avoid. Black bears. Wildlife is not too much of a hazard for us where we recreate. Black bears exist. They're, as we talked about, seldom seen. I don't know if there's even been a bear attack within the Mount Hood forest, and I don't know how long. You see their tracks, you see their poop, but they like to stay away from folks. But, you know, it's not impossible to not see one. Mountain lions are the ones that might scare people the most. Oregon is cougar territory. They are around. You probably will never, ever see one. I think in the last 100 years, there has been just 5 to 10 attacks as a whole. And in every one of these scenarios, it's with solo or 2 people groups. So I think the takeaway message, especially hiking in the backcountry, is to bring your buddies. Buddy system is the best system to make noise and to show you're a large group. But they're beautiful, beautiful specimen to be respected.
And one of the ways in which to respect wildlife is to make sure that when nature calls when you're in the woods, that you are doing a good job of hiding it. And so when we're out in the woods and you have to use the bathroom, there's 2 options. People will sometimes carry something called wag bags, which if you're going up Mount Adams or you're hiking through Zion Canyon, there's not enough space for people to actually be able to dig cat holes. Like you're either in the water or you're on the rocks. And so there would just be poop everywhere if people were doing that. And so you actually carry a plastic foil container, like it's kind of like a Ziploc bag that's filled with, I'm pretty sure is just cat litter. And then you do your business in it. This is the part that really sticks with people. You have to carry it down the mountain with you. And so those sorts of trips are really difficult because by the end of the trip, you are carrying a gigantic container of your own waste, which is like a very, very intimate experience to have with yourself in nature. It really sets you thinking about all sorts of biological questions. But on the PCT, there's been some talk of transitioning to carrying your waste out. But for now, we're still on the cat hole protocol. So you carry a spade, you go off the trail at least, 50 to 100 feet off the trail, 200 feet away from water sources. You dig a hole that's 6 inches deep. This can be really difficult when you're in the woods where there's roots everywhere. And so you have to kind of learn where those spots are, because there are places where it's easy to dig, places where it's hard to dig. But we teach you, we go through this all with you. Every time I take a group out into the woods, we have at least a 15-minute potty training session where I show everybody all the different ways to do it, because sometimes people can't just pop a full squat in the middle of nowhere. They have to use a tree to support themselves. They have to use their backpack. But by the end of the trip, everybody gets really comfortable with doing it. And you get really comfortable talking to people about, hey, I've been having this problem. Do you have any help? Also, sugar. When people start to eat a ton of sugar snacks, they have like their sugar oatmeal for breakfast, plus they add some sugar to their coffee. That tends to go in the opposite direction. And so this is just something that when you're in the woods, you just kind of have to be taking care of it all the time. It's not gross. It's not weird. You spend enough time walking around with a backpack with all your stuff in it, and you start to become very comfortable dealing with it. Basically, you just have to start walking. I cannot tell you the number of times that I've had people show up to a trip and they haven't put their backpack on, and we've sent them a training plan and they haven't trained, and those people have a really bad time, especially if they're with a group where everybody else is trained. Because the difference between walking 10 miles a week, let's say, and not walking at all is enormous. So start with day hikes. If you live in a place where you can't really hike, then you can go to the gym and you can walk on the treadmill. You can walk around your neighborhood, aim for a couple miles a day. Google Maps has a great tool where you can basically like map out a route and be like, okay, so this is 1 mile, and you do your 1 mile. And then you start to build up and get to the point where you're doing 10-mile days on the weekends. And as you're walking, start trying to think about your gear. Like, what do you want? How do you want to be able to access your snacks? How do you want to be able to access your water? How do you want to carry all these things? After you've done about a week of walking and thinking about it, start carrying the pack that you're going to take with you on the trail. This is another thing where people will show up at the office and they will like pull a backpack out of its store wrapping and they've never put it on before. Or they've borrowed a backpack from a friend of a friend and they've never put it on. Backpacks are not all created equal. And so before you come to Troutdale to start this hike, make sure that you have fully loaded your backpack at least once and walked 10 miles in it. If that means that you have to walk circles around your neighborhood, you have to walk circles around your neighborhood, them's the breaks, you know? It's like, I think it's not about finding the perfect opportunity to take a hike or go somewhere. It's literally about just the discipline of knowing that you don't want to suffer full time on this trip. You want to have like at least a little bit of fun. If you're walking and you're feeling pretty good, but you want to add something to it, I really like strength training, squats, deadlifts, kettlebell swings, glute bridges. All of these things are really good. And when I have to do a really big climb or I'm worried about elevation, I will literally just climb stairs. I will go to the gym and I will put a book on it and really slow pace, like nothing it's nothing crazy, but I'll just climb stairs for an hour 3 times a week. And it's not a particularly glamorous way of training, but when I've had to do that for, like, we do this hike in the Grand Canyon, which is 27 miles, 7,000 feet of elevation gain in a single day. And it was super smoky and conditions were really bad. And so I couldn't train outside and the Stairmaster saved me. It was boring, but I read a lot and I did the hike with no problems. So to kind of bring us into the closing of our PCT talk, one of the things that I really wanted to highlight is these women's trips that we host. So sometimes you're going through something in life and it is difficult and it is painful and you really need to go somewhere to recharge and to be surrounded by people who understand the sort of things that you're going through or maybe have gone through or are around the corner from. And so these women's trips can be a lot of fun for that. And so we offer a couple of them every year. And so if it's something that you think that you'd want to try, be able to go out into the woods and be in this group where you don't have to worry about the dynamics of co-ed, this is really powerful. And it's just really epic terrain, really beautiful views, just stunning landscapes, wildflowers, waterfalls, everything's so green. Like the ground's soft enough that you can hike barefoot. It's just, it feels like the kind of nature that wants you to be there.